Before Barack Obama takes his second oath of office, he'll have a mammoth economic crisis to sort through. A slew of painful spending cuts and tax increases kick in at the beginning of the year. Can he tackle the problem before the U.S. economy flies off this so-called fiscal cliff? Let's bring in Robert Reich. He's a public policy professor at the University of California at Berkeley and a former Secretary of Labor. He's also the author of Beyond Outrage. Thanks for being with us, Robert Reich. Let me first ask you about this re-election of President Barack Obama. I mean, what's your first reaction to, what was your first sort of reaction as far as the future of the economy of this country is concerned when you heard the news that Obama was indeed re-elected?
One word, relief.
Why?
There is I think we're on the right path, but there is going to be a big challenge, as you alluded to, the fiscal cliff. That's about $500 to $600 billion of tax increases and spending cuts automatically go into effect in January unless the president and Congress agree to some sort of a formula that delays that kind of budget deficit reduction. It's just too much too soon, and I think the president is going to quite soon deal with Congress, try to get bipartisan support for something that, again, is not as dramatic and as radical and as really potentially devastating to the economy as that fiscal cliff.
And so you're hopeful, but I follow you on Twitter, and I read some of what you write as well. Some of the things you say are extremely gloomy. The fundamentals of this U.S. economy, you write, are still rotten. I think that's a word you actually used. So why the optimism? I mean, why the relief? Did you think a Romney alternative was simply worse?
Yes, I thought the Romney alternative, giving huge tax breaks to the very wealthy, cutting investments in education, training, infrastructure, getting rid of Obamacare, getting rid of Dodd-Frank, the regulatory reform bill for Wall Street, those were all dramatic steps in the wrong direction. But the road ahead is not going to be easy. I mean, there are big headwinds, as economists like to call them. Europe and the European recession. China is slowing down. India is slowing down. The global economy is slowing down. And America has, as I said, this dramatic fiscal cliff ahead. Obama has got to take quite serious action, and as soon as possible.
But his critics say, you know, he had a couple years when he controlled both houses of Congress, and then he made some timid initiatives when the House was on fire. And his critics say he was never forceful enough to really get this economy going again. Do you agree with that? And do you think he has the plan to move the country forward in the next 4 years?
Well, I'm sure he has a plan. The question is whether the priorities are exactly right. I would say the number one priority should be jobs and growth of the economy. The deficit is not the number one problem right now. And what he needs to do is, again, come up with a plan with Republicans that triggers deficit reduction when the economy reaches, let's say, 6% unemployment and 3% economic growth for, say, 2 consecutive quarters. Then you go to deficit reduction. But you don't go to deficit reduction before then, because otherwise you risk a European-style austerity trap.
Right. And is this something that's possible in the U.S., do you think? Or this is just a typically European thing, this sort of like dealing with the deficit and not implementing growth measures? That some people are saying that might not be the right approach.
Well, unfortunately, the Republicans have adopted the mentality of the European austerity economics in terms of thinking that the deficit is the biggest problem and that by taming the deficit, we bring jobs back. Nothing could be further from the truth, as Europe is showing the United States.
So why are so many people, but this is a question I have for you since I have an opportunity to talk to you, and it's rare. Why then, in your estimation, if it is so wrong to deal with the deficit in a time of an economic slowdown, are people wrong in choosing that strategy? Why? Because it's politically expedient?
Well, the very simple reason they're wrong is that when the private sector, that is consumers and businesses, have pulled back because they are uncertain about the future, or they don't have enough money, or they are deep in debt, that is the time when you don't want the public sector to pull back. What you need then is the public sector to be the spender of last resort, to fill in the gap and to generate enough economic activity so that the private sector, both consumers and businesses, feel more confident and start start investing and buying again. The worst thing you can possibly do when you have high unemployment and a lot of underutilized capacity is for government to pull back, to cut spending and to raise taxes. Then you are going to make the situation much worse, as Europe demonstrates. You know, the issue is not the deficit per se in any country. The issue is the deficit as a percentage of total economic activity. It's that ratio, deficit versus the size of the economy. If the economy slows down, that ratio gets worse. And Europe should understand that now, and the United States better learn from Europe's mistakes.
Well, those are two approaches. Certainly on the right, I'll hear people disagree with that. But Robert Reich, always a pleasure speaking to you on CNN International. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Anna.